Hey everybody, it's Nicole or Nikki Bricks here, and today I thought it'd be really fun to walk you guys through what I think are the top 10 LEGO Star Wars Microfighters. So I'm a really big fan of Microfighters myself for a couple of reasons. One just being their general affordability, and two being that their concept is just really fun and I like having them all lined up on my shelf. It's kind of like having a clone army, only I have an army of ships through all the years, battles, and sides of the war, that being Empire, Republic, First Order, Resistance, you get the picture. Anyway, I'm really excited to share this list of my top 10 LEGO Star Wars Microfighters, so without further ado, let's just jump right into it and take a look at our first contender. So starting out with number 10, we have set 75223, the Naboo Starfighter. So I love the prequel films. In fact, I love all things related to Padme and Naboo, so naturally the Naboo Starfighter had to be included on this list. I recognize that it's not one of the best, which is why I have it listed last here. Regardless, you get a young Anakin Skywalker who does look pretty cute there, and an R2-D2 astromech head. And having just the head without the rest of his body does save a lot of room on these microfighters, so that design does make a lot of sense. Like every microfighter, it does come with stud shooters in the front there. There's really not a lot to say about it. It is a very simple ship, even in its most detailed form, which is why I think it translated so well to microfighter form. Overall, it made it on the list for that reason, as well as the fact that I just really like this ship. Coming in at number 9, we have set 75032, the X-Wing Fighter. And looking at it now, I am questioning its placement at number 9 because I can't deny that this microfighter is a really solid looking build. It has a good balance between looking very detailed but not quite looking messy. Honestly, it might just be my overexposure to X-Wings that made me bump it down to 9. Anyway, the design is actually very good, and I especially like the engine pieces because they're massive, and I think that they really embody what a microfighter is, which is basically just a small chunky ship. And I think that the nose of the ship looks very good with that slope piece. It looks very accurate to the actual ship. The set comes with an X-Wing pilot with a very neat looking helmet, and like the Naboo Starfighter, also comes with an astromech droid head, which is pretty cool, and you get a little green one this time. Of course, you also get a couple flick-fire missiles, can't forget about those. Our next microfighter is set 75228, the Escape Pod vs. Dewback, and I really like this microfighter. It's actually a dual microfighter set because you can see you get 2 instead of just 1. I just think it's so cool. For one, you get 3 minifigures, you get a complete R2-D2 and C-3PO, but also that Sand Trooper with the orange pauldron. There's just something about that minifigure in particular that I just love, so definitely gives the set a boost for me. The concept behind this duo was also really cool, R2 and 3PO crashing in their escape pod on Tatooine, and I think the thrusters in the back of their pod especially look pretty neat. But the Dewback and Sand Trooper are definitely the reason this microfighter set made the list. I think they totally just nailed the design with both of those. The Dewback looks pretty cute and kind of to scale, which is nice. It's certainly not the goal of microfighters, but that might just be why I like it so much. He's also just very accurate looking to those things in the films. But also the Sand Trooper has that really nice printing all over him, like he's been coated in sand from just hours of being out in the dunes. That just looks really excellent in my opinion. Next up at number 7, we have set 75162, the Ywing. Now this set was actually inspired by the Ywings in Rogue One. I'm not gonna lie, one of the things I like most about this set is actually the pilot, specifically his helmet with that Resistance logo printing. I just think it looks amazing. The Ywing itself is also really well designed. I especially love those slope pieces used for the cockpit and the engines. The overall shape is just pretty good. And of course you have a couple of flick-fire missiles because what even is a microfighter without a couple of stud shooters or flick-fire missiles? Coming in at number 6 here, we have set 75072, the ARC-170 Starfighter. So this microfighter is a version of the ship that I just desperately wish LEGO would reproduce in their normal scale. The ARC-170 Starfighter, just in my opinion, is one of the coolest ships in Star Wars. I think they did a really good job packing in the shape and as much detail as they could into this microfighter without making it look too messy, although I will admit that it does look a little oddly chunky, especially at its base. So basically from the nose to the thrusters, but the wings I really do like. I like the use of those flat clip-on pieces to give it that extra wingspan layer, and I do think that the front does a good job of mimicking that weird boat-like shape that the ARC-170 has. In this set, you do get a clone pilot, and that's always cool. I love getting clones, but unfortunately, seeing as this is an old design, he doesn't come with the new clone face printing or darker skin, but he does come with a really sick-looking helmet, if I do say so myself. I love the way it wraps around his head. I just think it's always fun to get new and interesting-looking helmets. I personally don't have this one. I'm not sure how rare they are, but they certainly don't make them anymore, at least not that I've noticed. Next up at number 5, we have one of my favorite microfighters ever, set 75264 Kylo Ren Shuttle. I just think the design of this ship is so cool, and it looks absolutely amazing in microfighter form. Kylo Ren Shuttle is actually what kicked off my microfighter collection. Clearly, I'm very new to the game here, but I just couldn't resist when I saw it on the shelves, especially considering I could get that Kylo Ren minifigure with his cracked custom molded helmet and lightsaber. As a minifigure alone, he's just awesome. But looking at the ship, the whole thing was just absolutely designed perfect. Everything from the red window in the front representing the cockpit to the body of the ship where he sits and the thrusters in the back all just look amazing. I also love the wings on the ship because in general, just the way his ship flies and how those things fold in and out has always seemed really cool to me, and the look translated quite brilliantly to microfighter form. You also don't run into any sort of chunkiness problem, which I personally don't mind. I kind of like that about microfighters, but for some people that does make this specific one more appealing. Next up at number 4 here we have set 75295, the Millennium Falcon. This microfighter is a classic. It is the 3rd time they've produced it, each time having made little improvements to it here and there, and honestly, they just keep on making it look better. This iteration comes with the newer and still fantastic looking Han Solo, with the annoying exception of the white chest printing on his torso. I still don't know what that's about, but other than that, I do really like this figure. The Millennium Falcon itself is a really sick build and also really fun. I just love the overall design of it. You can see it has a couple of stud shooters next to the radar dish there. The thrusters in particular on the back are really cool because they use these 1x2 clip-on pieces to get the wraparound look, and it works quite flawlessly. The radar dish and cockpit piece look amazing too, and I just love how Han Solo sits in there. I think the minifigure incorporation into this build was perfect, so naturally this had to be in my top 5. So coming in hot at number 3, we have set 75028, the Clone Turbo Tank. This microfighter could not be one of my favorites. I debated putting it at number 1, but ultimately just general favoritism bumped a couple other microfighters up higher than this one. The design is so cool with those wheels and the gun sticking out of the front there. It has a couple of flick-fire missiles off to the side, and notably the Phase 2 Clone Trooper minifigure who sits really nicely up in the front. I think the fact that this is not a ship, but rather a tank on the ground has something to do with my liking of it so much, aside from the fact that it just inarguably looks really cool. It stands out from most other microfighters because it's one of the few that isn't some sort of starfighter or spaceship. This set also just looks really accurate, so you have to give it some extra points for that. Now getting down to my top 2, we have set 75076, the Republic Gunship. Again, as a prequel fan, I'm sure some bias is coming into play here, but I think this microfighter is amazing. I will give it some criticism and say that there is something just a little too chunky and weird about those engines, but this is one of my favorite ships in Star Wars, and you can't stop me from loving this microfighter, especially with that clone pilot minifigure from Episode 2. I think the colors of the gunship look great, as does the overall shape. I also really like the inclusion of that little round tile piece with the Republic logo printing on it. And you know what? Those little gear shift pieces in the very front representing the gun sticking out of the ship are just perfect. I totally loved the design of this ship as a microfighter, and while I did move it around quite a bit, I actually had it at like number 6 at one point. I just think it's too good not to at least include in my top 3. And finally, our reigning champ at number 1 is set 75127, the Ghost. This microfighter is my white whale of microfighters. It is 110% without a doubt my favorite, and you can't change my mind on that. I have accepted that many of you will not agree with me, but as a whole, I loved this ship in Rebels, and I totally love it in microfighter form. Not to mention, you cannot buy the full-scale version of this ship for like less than $600. This microfighter comes with Hera Syndulla, one of my favorite female characters in Star Wars, who truly looks amazing. I've just always really liked this minifigure. The Ghost itself also looks really great. I've always considered the ship to be a little bit messy looking, a reason that I actually used to really dislike it for, but obviously that's not the case anymore. So it certainly does look almost a bit chaotic with all of those colors and different pieces piled on top, but I find it very accurately mimics the look of the ship in Rebels. I especially love the cockpit piece in the front with the transparent dome because it really closely resembles the actual cockpit in its shape. And of course there is a stud shooter smack in the middle of the build that actually works out okay because it's near enough to where the guns on the actual Ghost are. So for those reasons, and just quite honestly the fact that I just love the Ghost, and for whatever reason this ship is my favorite, it has to be number 1. You may not agree with me, but that's okay. Nevertheless, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, feel free to subscribe to see my other content, and comment down below what your favorite microfighters are. I would honestly be really curious if you have any that didn't make my list that are in your like top 5. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have an amazing day, and I will see you next time.